people need ways to do the things that are hard but that still matter, especially when someone's grieving. People are scared to do it wrong. They're afraid to make missteps. And so sometimes I do nothing. And that was the worst part when I lost my mom or when she was sick, is the distance I felt by people doing nothing. And I looked back and realized they just didn't know how to show up. So that's where it started. I thought, how can I help the people who have the heart and need the how?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the legendary entrepreneur and community impact maker. With over 20 years in working in nonprofits, Tiffany Wachtler has now started her own company, Creating Kindness through the Kindness Concierge, a company that aims to make sure that those who are grieving and celebrating feel loved and less alone. Please welcome the legend, Tiffany Wachtler.
Thank you so much. That was a great intro. I appreciate you.
Great to be here with you, and let's get started quickly. You have your own company, you're working in nonprofit, and you're finishing your degree. Where do you build us the connections there? How are you doing all those things at one time?
We were just talking about routine.
That's a very good question. I think I've always gone at a pretty fast pace when it's something I love. So the nonprofit work pays the bills in the big sense. I always wanted to make sure if I had a job, it had to matter. It had to be doing something that was for the greater good. So that feels good and feels like a great way to just spend your work day. And then the Kindness Concierge is nice to have as an option, just very accessible to people who need a better way to show up. School's a tricky one. That's the one where I just got to squeeze it in where I can. Mm-hmm. And luckily, as an adult student, I have a lot of flexibility, but I just layer it because I still need to be social. But I think when it's something you care about, you find a way to make the pieces fit together.
Talk to us a little bit about the nonprofit. Tell us what the impact is and how you got involved.
So I worked in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years and with a lot of different orgs. And I'm most excited right now. I am at Special Olympics Colorado, and I help them produce their fundraising events, some of their big signature events, so that they can promote inclusivity and help the community of people living with intellectual disabilities. So it's a great way to actually be able to use a lot of my skills and talent and create those moments where people can see how can you show up. Like, the best thing about nonprofits is that you can see just individuals and ordinary people doing extraordinary things and building community every single day.
Tell us a little bit about the Special Olympics and what's the best event that you've thrown and that you've put together.
Ooh, I'm new to Special Olympics. So that is, Stay tuned for that.
Okay, all right.
But my original connection was as a Special Olympics coach. So about 15 years ago, I decided to coach bowling, which is one of the most social sports, P.S., because I am not athletic. And they said, you can do swimming, where I thought they could die. That's not going to work for me. Or bowling. And so I became a coach, and I did it for 5 years, and it was the best volunteer experience I ever had. It taught me so much. So this has been exciting to be back in the world of Special Olympics, but on the other side to kind of create those moments for other volunteers and other donors, people, so they can get a little bit of that magic I got.
You said it was one of the best experiences that you ever had. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the experience and what you learned?
Yes. So I went in with the title coach thinking I was going to teach, and got there with all my bowling expertise. And I was like, listen, I'm just going to help everyone. The first thing I learned is that Special Olympics is not just children. So almost all my athletes were adults. And I was like, well, this is different than I expected. Mm-hmm. And then bowling seems very simple. You grab the ball, you put your fingers in specific holes, you throw it down the lane. So I thought, this is going to be so easy. And what I learned is, as I was going to coach, I would see an athlete pick up the ball in a way that's different than putting your fingers in the specific holes, throw it different than I thought you would throw it, and then get a strike. And I was like, wow, you can do so many things different than you think they're supposed to be done and be successful. So that was the first thing I learned. I was like, this is remarkable that there's so many ways to do this. And I was so rigid before and thought, I'm going to come in and teach. And then the other thing about bowling is every single turn is a new opportunity. So all of the athletes, they would throw, a gutter ball potentially and be stoked. I got another chance, and everyone would cheer them on. And if you bowl a 7-10 splits, the two furthest pins apart, it's very hard to get this. Most professionals have a hard time. One happened in my head. I'm like, this athlete's never going to get this shot. And yet his fellow athletes like, you can do it. Go for it. This is great. You're an awesome bowler. The bowler would bowl, likely miss. And they're like, you tried so hard. That was great. And all of a sudden there was so much synergy about just giving an effort and believing you could do something that I, as a bystander, thought you couldn't do. And so those are probably two of the biggest lessons I got there. I was like, wow, you taught me how to be supportive and kind and coach in a way that also lets you just be who you are. Show up as your authentic self, do it your way, if that works for you. And I wouldn't have thought that going in. I thought, you look at this mark, you throw this ball, you move a couple boards. There's a lot of technique to it. And I had to throw it all out the window and just start to learn from them instead of trying to teach. So sometimes I think you got to go in ready to learn and not to teach.
Incredible.
What do you think makes us lose that? I mean, we as athletes know in the athletic world is, hey, yeah, it isn't. There is always another opportunity. But what do you think as adults makes us change to where this is the way it's supposed to be done, and like that's a failure, what are you doing, versus, hey, great effort, and hey, you got another chance? What makes us lose that?
There's a lot of influences about what success looks like. When we're young, we don't have those kind of boundaries, or when you're in a situation where you can just be who you are. And I think for me, I feel like you start to lose that because the self-doubt grows in, because different influences are telling you aren't good enough. This isn't a space for you. You must try harder. You can't succeed at this. And I think that's what the doubt starts to break us down. And I think the world gets smaller. I think when you're young or when you're kind of that carefree, the world's huge. And I feel like our world starts to get smaller as people put these constraints on us and as they start to decide who you are. So I think there's something about being able to do some of those breakthrough moments where you're like, no, this is a space where I can just be who I am. I don't have to live with the noise, but the noise is there. I think that's what takes that away.
You also talked about being an event person. Let's change gears a little bit. If someone wants to throw the perfect event, what are some key things to throwing a successful event?
Life is in the details. I think that is the big thing, is that if you go to an event and it's phenomenal, they make it look easy, that there was not all these levers moving behind the curtain. So I think if you're going to throw a great event, first think about the details. And when I do anything, and most of my work in Kindness Concierge or at Special Olympics, wherever I'm working, I think, what do I want people to know and what do I want people to feel? So anytime I produce an event, I'm like, what do we want them to know and what do we want them to feel? And then build the layer so that those things happen. And just always think about the participant experience. Because sometimes we get so wrapped up in the details and what we think is so important. And then you get there, the event happens, and no one noticed that little thing that you're like, this is going to be it. This is going to be it. I kind of felt like my own wedding. I was like, how dare these people not notice this detail that I spent hours and years, I felt like, of my life doing. So I think sometimes if you just think like, what does this feel like for them? What does it look like? And then be organized and do those details to bring it to life. That's what I think the key is.
I think it's a great perspective. I just threw an event about sustainable food with JP Morgan Chase, and I was like, man, there's not going to be enough people in here. And it's 15 people. And the people are invited by myself and my friend Michael Silverman. Dinner was supposed to be scheduled for 2 hours and went for 4 hours because of who we invited. All the things that we were worried about, like, oh, it's not going to be filled. We had 15 people and it was incredible. So I appreciate that. That being said, I would love to know what community means to you, because you're building events, Kindness Concierge. What does community mean to you?
That's a great question. I think that's very layered for me. I think community is about building the network of support around you and being willing to pour yourself into reciprocating it. I think community is about building together and feeling less alone. And I think I find that in lots of different areas of my life. And I think not so much when we're celebrating. I think it's easy to build community in moments of height and excitement. I think it's harder to build it when there's something at risk. I feel like in this time that we're living in, we want to have connection, which is what community means. But there's a risk in being who you are and being vulnerable in our society where you may not be accepted for that. The community may not be welcoming you. So for me, I feel like creating space where everyone has a place and you matter, but making sure you're taking on the responsibility that we can't just carry you, you also have to carry us.
Mm-hmm. Where are you feeling that we need more community? Where are you feeling that? Because I agree with you. And I'm seeing that people want to be around or come back to social events. It's not this virtual reality world that we thought was going to be here in COVID. Like, yeah, where do you think that's coming from?
I do think the pandy was rough on us. I feel like the pandy was rough.
The pandy, I like that.
Yeah. It was rough. I think we were always looking for community, but I feel like the isolation that we had in the pandemic obviously made us hungry for it, but it also gave us a lot of space to see who people were and how do people show up. I think it was really hard. I'm a really social person. I'm like, where are my friends? How are they moving through this? And giving some grace for like, maybe this person can't show up to your virtual happy hour, which let's never do that again. Let's not do the virtual happy hours again. So I think some of it is from the pandemic. The other part of it, I feel like, is that community for me feels like hope. And we're in this state of the world that feels like there's a lot of despair. I try and really decide how much news I take in and how often, because it can just be so heartbreaking or hard on me. So I think one thing that's been beautiful in my life is always finding the light. So I feel like people are looking for, where is their light? Where is their joy? Because it's happening all the time. It may not make the news, but people are doing incredible things all the time. So I think that's where the hunger for community is like we want to see some joy and light and see the kindness and good in people. And sometimes that only turns up in tragedy. It only turns up when something catastrophic happens. We decide to rally as a community or rally as a culture, rally as a country. And as soon as that kind of settles, we go back to being our own ways. So I think my hope is that we'll just weave a little more kindness and keep it consistent. Like show up all the time in small ways. Don't wait for the tragedy. And in my case, it was death, or people started to show up, or my mom's sickness. But like, don't wait for those moments. Notice people, see people. And really, I think it's important to not believe that the world is a tragic place, because there's joy and love happening in it all the time.
Well, your company, Kindness Concierge, brings that joy and love to people. And you talked about the experience with losing your mother kind of being a catalyst, but let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
You're working full time, and you say, I want to start a business.
Is that what I said?
Yeah. Well, clearly, right? Or
Right.
what did you say?
Yeah.
What did you say that led to the creation of Kindness Concierge?
So originally I thought it would be a book idea. I thought people need a way to show up for loved ones when it's hard. So everyone's got some way they can do it. So I'll just write a book, give them a lot of options. And as I was thinking about this book, I thought, well, if someone's going through something hard, their person has to read the book, process the book, apply the book. I was like, this book is not going to do what I want it to do. And so it started as just like a noodling on a book for right after my mom died, and she died in 2017. And then at the beginning of last year, I thought there must be a better way to do this. And it started with a friend asking me if I could send her family's holiday cards out, because I love a good photo holiday card. I send it the day after Thanksgiving. I want to be the first one in the mailbox. I'm really, really competitive about it. And she's like, I don't understand how you get this done every year with all the other things on your plate. Can you just do it for me? And I said, absolutely not. I don't have any desire to do that for you and your family. But it sparked something like, ooh, what do I have that I could do that other people think is hard or tedious? And I thought, oh, I can show them how to show up for people who are grieving. And so that's how it started. It was like, how can I make this book a service? Because people need ways to do the things that are hard, but that still matter, especially when someone's grieving. People are scared to do it wrong. They're afraid to make missteps. And so sometimes I do nothing. And that was the worst part when I lost my mom or when she was sick, is the distance I felt by people doing nothing. And I looked back and realized they just didn't know how to show up. So that's where it started. I thought, how can I help the people who have the heart and need the how? So that's where it started.
And it's gift boxes that you give to people. So everybody understands, Kindness Concierge, you do a little, not even an orientation, but you do a meet with the person and say, okay, what's going on? How can we help? You helped me send some great gifts for the end of the year to my broadcast partners.
I didn't get one.
Yeah.
I'm not a broadcast partner, but I didn't get one.
You got to step up. You're getting there. You're getting there. You're on the list this year.
You gotta earn
But
it.
so you're giving these gifts. It's a gift box, but it's not just that. I mean, the responses I got from people who received these boxes were some of the best responses I've ever received from an action I've done. And it wasn't that I gave them a gift. It was how it was received. How do you create a gift box that conveys the love and compassion and community that someone has when someone else is going through a tough time or celebrating a good time?
That's great. So I do two things. One, I do care packages that I already have curated that are kind of like a hug in a box. That's the easy way to get that. Like, I want to send this to someone. Where people get stuck is on the card. So I help them customize the message. You know, exactly what do you want to convey? And then I give them options so they don't feel stuck with, I don't know what to say. So let's figure out the words that are meaningful to you. So that's one kind of arm of what I do. And the other one's more like what you're talking about, where I kind of do these kind consultations and listen to what's going on, whether it's one, most of the time it's something hard. Sometimes it's celebratory, which I love. My dad exclusively thinks they're thank you gifts. And so I send them that way. But really talking about, like, what is the situation? What's your relationship to this person? And what can we do? Because sometimes it's sending something and it's finding a curated gift that someone else has already created. I do that often. Or it's saying, let me build a box based on what you all think would be meaningful to this person. Sometimes it's not a thing, it's an action. Because there are times, like I was working with someone and her friend had just gone into hospice. And she really wanted to be there for her and do something. We were like, this is maybe not the time in her life to send something. And so we thought, like, do we send comfortable pajamas? Like, is she eating? Could we send food or not? And kind of going back and forth. And we decided the gift was time. And so she decided to go and visit her and spend time with her and her family at this last stage of her life. And afterwards, she followed up with me and she said, I would have never reached out to her if I hadn't been following your reels, if you hadn't given me the courage to just be in that space with her. And now I know I will never regret giving that gift of time. So sometimes it's just being present. Mm-hmm. So I try and look at like, what's your budget? What's meaningful? What matters to that person? And what honors them? Another person I had recently was similar situation. This person wasn't receiving guests. They weren't wanting to see anyone other than their really close family. And she said, I feel so grounded when I'm outside. The person she was trying to support. She's like, I just sit in the grass. I enjoy the sun. I just feel like connected to kind of the earth. And so we decided send her a wind chime and let her know every time she hears this chime that you are thinking of her and that she is loved. Mm. And this wind chime can then stay with her family. And this can continue to be thoughts about her in this very meaningful way. And it honors that she didn't want visitors. So I think there's just something about how can you show up that makes sense for your situation, makes sense for your budget, your time, whatever you have. And then if people can't send it themselves, then I execute it for them because I don't want it to get stuck there like, oh, that's a great idea and I'm still not going to do it. So sometimes I actually will elevate the service and send it on their behalf.
Do you do that for companies? Obviously, you did it for Ryan in terms of, just like a thank you gift, but like a follow-up gift of like, hey, here's a book and here's a note. How do you think about that just in terms of your business? Okay, you had a new client that you've done well with. Do you send them gifts? What does that look like?
What do I do for them?
Yeah.
Yes. There's a big opportunity, I think, with companies, both for helping their bereaved employees and how do you show up for them. So one lady, the HR lady or whoever, the person at your job has to send the flowers and circulate the card. I think there's a real partnership opportunity to help make that show up gift more meaningful. Mm-hmm. So that's an opportunity I feel like I would like to have with companies. And also, I think there is room to do those celebratory things. And I think I'm just about a special touch. My husband says, you are in the business of bad news. And I was like, no, I'm not. And I was like, in Ryan's case, it was celebratory. This is a way to show appreciation. I was like, I'm in the spirit of kindness. And how do you make those thoughtful touches? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, for companies that are wanting to say thank you. I think for recognizing people in celebratory times, I think that's a little easier. I feel like people feel like they have a good niche for that. So I'm always open to it, but I lean into the hard because that's where people are uncomfortable. That's where people struggle. And I think companies, I would like to work more one-on-one with companies doing kind of lunch and learns and speaking to what's your empathy policy at work? Because if you have a bereavement policy, it's probably 3 to 5 days at best. The average in the U.S. is 3 days. There's no way I could have come back to work and been highly functioning 3 days after losing my mom. And so what can you do as a company to make sure the work gets done, but that you're showing up for your employees? And if your place is a place of inclusion, it needs to be including grievers as well. Mm-hmm. There might need to be some room for someone to be off camera or not go to the company happy hour. I had my old boss tell me 3 times, I think in one day, like, don't forget to call your mom for Mother's Day one year. And I was like, I was like, well, I can't call my mom because she's dead, frankly. And she knew this and she felt terrible. But I don't say that to talk down to her. I say it's about an awareness that in your space, people might be going through things. And how do we create a space where they can do that and feel safe and comfortable or feel completely distracted with work so they don't have to think about all the nonsense and chaos that's coming with the hard times. So I feel like there's a lot of room for companies to do better and build some empathy policies.
She knew about the loss, correct?
She did.
How would you, if you're in her position, cover the entire company in terms of, because there are people who have lost their moms, people who do have their moms, people who have never met their mom.
Right.
How do you cover that if in your leadership position or if you were in that leadership position to make sure that everybody is included in that? So
she was just casually walking around the office as she was leaving for the day. And it was like just a little reminder on her way out. Mm-hmm. And I think in her position, I think, or for example, right now, Mother's Day is coming up very shortly. And I'm thinking about who in my office, someone just recently lost their mom and knowing that that's going to be a hard time. So I think even just being careful about broad statements, like have, wonderful Mother's Day. I think it's like for all of you who are celebrating your moms this weekend, I'm thinking of you and your moms or someone special to in your life. I always like to live out the best qualities of my mom. So I like when people say like they recognize things in my mom in the workspace, that's hard. So I think just being a little thoughtful of who these general experiences, how they might hit folks. There's no perfect way to do it. I think the best thing you can do is what she did, which was she corrected the misstep. She's like, I am so sorry. And she's like, I know how meaningful your mom is to you. And she's like, I'm really sorry. I just want to make sure that I love being a mom and I'm celebrating this time, but I also want to recognize the misstep.
Shout out to her for acknowledging that.
Yeah.
That's incredible leadership right there.
Yeah. The holidays are harder for me because my mom died around Christmas. And on Thanksgiving, I signed my mom's DNR that year. So like the holidays are really hard. And this year, she doesn't work with me anymore. She's moved on to a different position. I'm in a different company. And she texted me and she's like, I know this time of year can be really hard for you. And I just want to know I'm thinking of you. You always think of others and know that you're not alone. And I think having modeled that for her, it was beautiful to see her do that for me. And so I think we have to give grace when people misstep. Some people would have written her off and be like, she's a trash human. She's a delightful human. And she cared enough to care about me in multiple ways. And I think that's important.
One of your superpowers, and you've kind of done this with talking about briefly your mother, losing your mother, and talking about that boss, you give people the ability to see and understand, hey, grief is a part of everyday life for some people at your company, some people in your life. But you take away the fear that, especially when I first met you and hearing about Kindness Concierge, I think the fear was always like, hey, if somebody's grieving, like, are they going to stay in that space? And if I do something, am I going to be encouraging them to stay in a grieving space? But you've talked about grief as a place you move through with the support of community. So how do people in grief move forward? How did you do that in a meaningful way?
Right, that's a trick question because move forward is hard to describe. I appreciate that. Thank you for letting me know that you feel safe to do that and that kind of support. I think that when I learned about grief, and I'm talking about grief by death, we do lots of losses that we grieve, relationships, we grieve so many things, but specifically around death, I was ill-equipped. I thought I was going to work through these stages. I was going to graduate. I was going to crush grief and be done. Well, I was like, maybe probably a year, I'm probably going to be successful. It'll be over. I did not know it would be with me forever. So I think the first thing as someone who's supporting people who are grieving is that grief is not something to fix or cure. The best thing you can do is give people space to feel however they're feeling for as long as they're feeling it and be okay in that uncomfortable space. Also, I think that people feel like you need space to grieve and they give you that by staying away. And sometimes you need people actually to be in it with you. And some people gave me a lot of space. And like I said, it felt like distance, or they trusted other people were taking care of me. So I think the best thing you can do is show up in the immediacy of it and acknowledge it in a way that feels true to who you are. So maybe that's a text, maybe that's a phone call, maybe it's a card, whatever feels good to like how you operate. And then just recognize that initially people swarm and they're all there. What's really hard in grief is when everyone returns to and resends to their everyday lives and you feel alone. You're still dealing with this every single day. So when people say, well, I didn't want to remind you of your mom's death, I'm like, nope. I think about it every day. You can never remind me of it. So I love saying my mom's name. I love talking about her. And I think feeling okay doing that. So what I do, one of the things I do every single time, if I can remember in the moment, which is most of the time, if someone says, I lost my brother, I lost my mom, whoever died, I say, what is their name? What's your sister's name? What's your friend's name? And I always do it in the present tense because that person's still very real to them. And I want to know who they were as a person. And so that's one tiny thing I always try and do is like, what was your mom's name? And I think that's a way of just acknowledging that this is still something you're going through. And I think always trying to remember 2 years down the road, they're still going through it. I'm 7 years now. We don't get over grief. We learn how to work around it. It just takes up some space. I've seen a really great photo of a bookshelf and it's like grief. And then you start to see grief as a book and then other books start to fill in around it. But the book's always on the shelf. That's how I like to think about it.
What is your mother's name?
Michelle. And when she was married, my dad's name's Estelle, so she thought she was very cool because her name was Michelle L. Estelle.
Nice. And what would Michelle say about the Kindness Concierge and what you've built?
I think she would be proud. My mom always had a sense of there's always someone you can help. And there's always someone, in her case, I think it was less fortunate, she would think, and that's how I think the charitable side of myself came to be. But also she's like, politeness doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anything to be kind. So you don't have a choice because it's not costing you anything. So I think she would be very proud. I think she would be surprised to be the inspiration of it. I think she shouldn't like being the center of attention. But if I can tell you something funny, on her anniversary, I spend the whole day doing kind acts for her. So I go in the nursing home she lived and died in, whether the people work there or don't work there anymore, I go and bring breakfast to them and a note that says this is sometimes a thankless job and I need you to know how much it meant to me that you all cared for my mom.
Wow. So
I spent a whole day doing this. And this year I did it. And at the end of the day, I thought, maybe we should get a Miller High Life because my mom loved High Life. She lived for High Life. The champagne of beers. And in a blind taste test, she would know the difference between MGD. It was serious compassion and love. And so my friend and I said, well, let's go try and find a bar at 2 p.m, probably seedy on Colfax that has a High Life. And it took a lot of time to find one. It was harder than I thought. And so
Koufax is classy now.
I was like, damn. And like at 2 PM, I guess you're not supposed to be pounding beers. So finally we found one and walked in, and it was just what I hoped for. But the funny thing was that there were only a few people in it, and they were all drinking High Lifes.
Wow.
And I was like, stop it. I was like, all day we've been doing this stuff, and my mom has made no appearances. I don't ever feel her energy. It's not how I navigate my grief. But I was like, this is undeniable that she's like, stop doing all those kind acts. Just have a cold one for me. So it was really fun. And I think that that's the cool thing. It's like thinking about things that are true to her. Kindness and giving is true to me and inspired by her. But that beer was everything, and to be able to have a moment like that. So I think she'd be proud and also surprised to be the inspiration. She's very humble.
Well, Tiffany, you're an inspiration to us, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking about your journey and everything that you have built and the things and your perspective around community, your perspective around grief, your perspective around people being together, doing incredible things together. And your mom would be, I know she's proud.
Thank you. Thank you.
If people are not going to use Kindness Concierge to send a gift, what are things to think about when giving a gift to send love? What questions should the person ask themselves when sending a gift?
I think really thinking about who is the gift for. I think sometimes we give the things that we want, and we give the things that we want to receive or that feel comfortable for us. And I think really trying to think like, who is this person and what brings them joy? What is meaningful to them? And maybe try and tap into that or explain your gift and why. Sometimes I give something that is very meaningful to me and say, I wanted you to have this because this thing has meant so much. This book impacted me so much. I wanted to share it with you. And so I think just being really clear about what do they love or what would you love to share with them and saying the why.
Well, Tiffany Wachtler, the Kindness Concierge. Visit thekindnessconcierge.com. Learn more about the company, but also learn more about the amazing human being that's spreading kindness and love in this world. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
It was my pleasure.
Awesome.